What would you do if you spent 23 years being treated like an outsider in your own marriage? What if your husband's family constantly reminded you that you didn't belong, that you were just the help, and that you should feel grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance they threw your way? Today, I'm sharing the incredible story of Elaine Carter, a woman who endured decades of humiliation and disrespect, only to reveal that she had been quietly building the most perfect revenge all along. This is a story about patience, justice, and the power of knowing your worth. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let me tell you about the day Elaine Carter stopped walking behind everyone else and finally took her rightful place at the head of the table. The cold November morning started like any other funeral, with grief, black clothing, and family gathering to say their final goodbyes. But for Elaine Carter, standing at the back of her husband Andrew's funeral procession, this day would become something entirely different. Picture this: after 23 years of marriage, through sickness and health, through thick and thin, Elaine had stood by Andrew's side with unwavering loyalty. She had been the devoted wife, the caregiver, the woman who asked for nothing in return. But as she watched the funeral preparations unfold, it became painfully clear just how little her presence meant to his family. "You walk behind us, Judith," Andrew's mother hissed through clenched teeth, adjusting her pearl-encrusted hat. Her voice was sharp and rehearsed, carrying a message that Elaine had heard 1,000 times before. Know your place. Can you imagine, after 2 decades of marriage, being told to walk behind everyone else at your own husband's funeral? But here's where the story gets interesting. Elaine didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't make a scene. Instead, she simply stood there, clutching a small envelope that Andrew had placed in her hands just 1 week before he passed. "Don't open this unless they betray you," he had whispered, his fingers frail but his gaze unflinching. Even as his body weakened, Andrew had sensed what was coming. Let me paint you a picture of what Elaine's life had been like for the past 23 years. She wasn't just treated as an outsider at the funeral. This had been her reality for over 2 decades. At family Christmas dinners, while everyone else toasted with champagne in the formal dining room, Elaine was relegated to the kitchen, told she was needed to help with serving. In family portraits, she was consistently nudged to the back row, often cropped out entirely in the final frames. When taking pictures, she was always the one behind the camera, never in front of it. The message was always clear, though never spoken directly. "You're not one of us." Even her own husband, Brian, had failed her time and again. He never corrected his mother when she called Elaine the help. He never defended her when his son Jared mocked her modest upbringing, or when his daughter Ashley laughed at her department store shoes. Elaine used to tell herself that Brian was just caught in the middle, but over time she began to wonder if maybe he actually preferred her being silent, convenient, and disposable. But here's what they didn't know. Andrew, Brian's father, had been watching. He had been taking notes, and he had been planning. The Carter family home looked exactly the same as always. Polished mahogany walls, crystal chandelier casting soft gold light over the foyer. But when Elaine stepped through the front door after the funeral, something felt fundamentally different, as if the very air had shifted. "Everyone in the den," Judith announced, her voice having shed the performative softness she'd worn at the graveside. Here, she was back to being the queen of her castle. And where did they put Elaine? Behind Andrew's beloved bookshelf, out of view, out of mind. The same spot they'd always assigned her. "Elaine, you don't mind standing, do you?" Ashley said, with syrupy false concern. "It's just that there aren't enough seats for everyone who is close to Dad." Close to Dad. The words stung, but Elaine remained silent, letting them think whatever they wanted. When the family lawyer, Mr. Grayson, arrived and began reading the will, the distribution was exactly what you'd expect. Jared received 40% of Carter Enterprises and the commercial properties. Ashley got the beach house on Hilton Head, where Elaine had planted every flower with her own hands. Brian received the investment portfolio and the family home. Elaine was not mentioned at all. That concludes the reading, Mr. Grayson said, snapping the folder shut like a coffin lid. The reaction was immediate and telling. Ashley clapped her hands together. Finally, I can redo the kitchen the way I've always wanted. Jared was already on his phone, probably calculating rental income. Brian sat stunned, but wore a small, almost smug smile. Then Judith turned to Elaine with that patronizing expression she'd perfected over the years. I'm sure you understand, dear. Andrew wanted everything to stay in the bloodline. If you need more time in the guest house, we'll allow it. The guest house, a converted garage that was barely livable. After 2 decades of loyalty, that's what they were offering her. But then Elaine did something that changed everything. No, Elaine said quietly, reaching into her purse. Everyone turned as she pulled out an envelope, the one Andrew had given her, sealed with weight far heavier than paper. Mr. Grayson, she said calmly, I believe you need to read this. It's the real will, the one Andrew signed 3 weeks ago. Watch how quickly the atmosphere can change in a room. Judith's face went pale. Jared dropped his phone. Ashley's hand froze mid-scroll. And Brian finally looked up at his wife, not with confidence, but with fear. Mr. Grayson's fingers trembled as he opened the envelope. The seal cracked with quiet finality, like the snap of an old branch. This appears to be a newer will, he muttered, color draining from his face. And then came the bombshell. According to this will, Andrew Carter leaves his entire estate to his wife, Elaine Carter. But wait, it gets better. Attached was a note in Andrew's handwriting. If this document is not read first, my family has committed fraud. Hold them accountable. Judith's response was immediate. That's fake. Andrew wasn't well. He was confused. Anyone could have tricked him. That's when Elaine reached into her purse again and pulled out a small flash drive. Andrew anticipated this, Elaine said, holding up the drive. He left something else for this moment. What appeared on that laptop screen was devastating. It was Andrew, not the frail man they'd buried that morning, but a sharp-eyed, composed version from months earlier. If you're watching this, Andrew said in the video, then my family has already tried to cut Elaine out, and they've likely done more than just lie. The footage then shifted to show a recording from just 2 weeks before Andrew's death. The grainy video captured this very room, and the voices were unmistakably clear. Judith's voice, cold and calculated. The doctor says his balance is bad. One fall down the stairs. Mom, stop, Jared whispered in the recording. He doesn't even use the handrail anymore, Judith continued. Those meds make him dizzy. Accidents happen all the time. Even Mr. Grayson's voice appeared in the recording. If the new will is too recent, it might be questioned. Then we make sure no one asks questions, Jared had answered. Present-day Ashley made a choking sound. Jared's hands clenched the armrests. Brian looked like he might be sick. But the revelations weren't over. You thought I wouldn't know, Elaine said, her voice quiet but deadly. But Andrew recorded everything. She then placed a thick manila folder on the coffee table. Years' worth of documents, bank transfers, property deeds, all signed, notarized, and filed, dating back over 5 years. Andrew didn't just rewrite his will, Elaine explained conversationally. He began transferring everything to me years ago. The beach house Ashley was so excited about. Transferred 2 summers ago, Elaine replied. The same weekend you called me just the second wife in front of your friends. She walked over to Andrew's desk and pulled out a printed spreadsheet with notes in Andrew's handwriting beside each item. Every time one of you humiliated me, she continued, Andrew made a decision, a quiet transfer, a shift in ownership, like clockwork. She began reading from the list. January 15th, 2020, the day you started your affair with Rebecca Bryan. That afternoon, Andrew signed over 15% of the company to me. March 3rd, 2021. Judith told Andrew I was a gold digger who didn't belong at the charity gala. The next morning, he moved the investment portfolio into my name. The pattern was clear, methodical, and devastating. You thought today was about inheriting what was his, Elaine said, turning to meet each of their eyes. But you can't steal what no longer exists. I made a phone call this morning, Elaine announced, while you were getting dressed for what you thought would be your celebration. The doorbell rang at that exact moment, a piercing chime that cut through the silence like a blade. Two detectives entered, professional and already informed. What followed was the systematic unraveling of years of planning on both sides. Elaine presented 3 small envelopes for Judith, a cheap rhinestone necklace with a note, "Didn't suit you anyway." Elaine explained how Judith had stolen it from her jewelry box 3 years earlier. Petty theft is still theft, the detective noted. For Jared, a debt forgiveness letter stamped void. You owe me $214,000 in unpaid loans. Elaine said calmly, now that I'm Andrew's legal heir, you owe me directly. 30 days to pay in full. For Ashley, printed emails, romantic messages between Ashley and Mr. Grayson, the family lawyer. Security cameras, Elaine explained. Andrew had them installed 2 years ago, including in your so-called private office. Mr. Grayson was arrested on the spot for conspiracy to commit fraud. As the handcuffs clicked, his composure completely disintegrated. I was following instructions, he cried, turning toward Judith. Tell them it was your idea. But Judith stayed silent. After the arrest, Brian stood up with his hands out, like a man trying to stop an avalanche. Elaine, he said, his voice cracking. We can fix this, please. We've been through so much. We're still family. Elaine's response was devastating in its simplicity. You're only calling me family now because I'm the only one left with anything to offer. That's when she pulled out one final envelope. Divorce papers, filed the week before. You were planning this, Brian asked, his shoulders crumbling. While you were planning how to split the inheritance, Elaine replied, I was planning my freedom. She then walked to the head of the dining table, the very seat where Andrew had presided for decades, the one Judith had always walked behind but never dared to sit in. Elaine pulled out the chair and lowered herself into it, slow and steady. What are you doing? Judith whispered. Taking my seat, Elaine replied simply. The symbolism was perfect. This wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about restoration, about rewriting the story in her own voice. From her new position at the head of the table, Elaine looked at the family portraits on the wall. The ones where she had always been cropped out, pushed to the side. From this angle, they looked different, smaller, like ghosts from a past she no longer had to appease. The house grew quiet, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of grief or guilt. It was the calm that comes after a storm has passed, leaving only truth in its wake. I was never behind you, Elaine said finally, her voice quiet but unshakable. I was just waiting for the right moment to pass you all. As I sat here writing this story, I couldn't help but think about the incredible lesson Elaine's journey teaches us. For 23 years, she endured humiliation, disrespect, and being treated as invisible in her own marriage. But she never broke, she never gave up, and most importantly, she never stopped being strategic. Andrew had taught her many things, how to love with steadiness, how to listen more than speak, but perhaps his greatest gift was this understanding, that patience, when paired with clarity, becomes power. Elaine's story shows us that quiet strength isn't weakness, it's preparation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait, watch, and plan. Sometimes justice doesn't come with fireworks and dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it comes quietly, methodically, and with the devastating precision of truth. The people who once made Elaine walk behind them learned a hard lesson that day. Never underestimate someone who has been quietly paying attention. Never assume that silence means acceptance. And never ever mistake patience for weakness. If Elaine's story moved you, if you've ever felt invisible, erased, or dismissed, I want you to know that your quiet strength isn't weakness either. Sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones that happen slowly, steadily, and with the kind of patience that builds empires. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Share it with someone who needs to know that their time is coming too. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of truth, justice, and the kind of emotional triumph that reminds us why we should never underestimate the power of someone who has been quietly keeping score. What did you think of Elaine's strategy? Was her revenge justified? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing your thoughts on these powerful stories of human resilience. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to stay in the shadows they've assigned you. See you in the next one.